almost everything you've been told about sex. It's not just incomplete, it's been distorted on purpose. We've been trained to see it either as something shameful and sinful, or as cheap, casual entertainment. But here's the truth. Sex was never meant to be just physical. Long before we had modern religion, before governments, corporations, or even organized social systems, the ancients understood something powerful, something that's been buried over the centuries. They knew that sexual energy wasn't just about reproduction or pleasure. It was sacred. It was transformational. It was a key to unlocking consciousness, a tool to connect with the divine. Now imagine this. What happens when you control someone's access to that energy, to their own life force? You gain control over their thoughts, their emotions, their choices, over their freedom. And that's exactly what has happened. The most revolutionary thing you can do today, the most dangerous act of freedom, is to reclaim that power, to recognize how deep the programming goes. Because once you do, once you see it, you can't unsee it. From the time you were little, the conditioning began. You may not remember it clearly, but think about it. How did people around you talk about sex? Was it open and respectful, or was it awkward, secretive, maybe even laced with fear or guilt? Your parents, your teachers, your culture, most of them weren't trying to deceive you. They were repeating what they were taught. They were raised under the same system that taught them that sex was dangerous, dirty, something to be ashamed of. You probably learned early on that sex was a topic to be avoided, to be whispered about. Maybe you were warned about it, scolded for being curious, or left to figure it all out on your own. And at the same time, the media was feeding you a very different message. Sex was everywhere. In movies, in music videos, in ads selling everything from perfume to hamburgers. It was glamorized and sensationalized, stripped of all sacred meaning and sold back to you as just another product. You were told to desire bodies, not connection, to seek pleasure, not presence, to chase stimulation, not spiritual union. Religion, ironically, was one of the first places where the meaning of sex was hijacked. Ancient spiritual systems once honored sexual energy as divine. But that changed. Sacred union, once seen as a pathway to the divine, was rebranded as sinful. Entire doctrines were built around the idea that repressing sexual urges meant you were pure, moral, and spiritually disciplined. But here's what they didn't tell you. Repression doesn't erase desire. It twists it. It distorts it. Suppressed sexual energy doesn't go away. It finds darker, more disconnected ways to express itself. And that's exactly what the system feeds on. A sexually repressed society is easier to control. It's more anxious, more distracted, and more dependent. And as you grew older, that conditioning only deepened. Where religion left off, the media took over. You were bombarded with hypersexualized content, flashing images of idealized beauty and shallow pleasure. Sex became a tool to sell things, to get your attention, to keep you consuming. But all of it was hollow. The sacred was nowhere to be found. You were programmed to crave, but never to be fulfilled. To seek out pleasure, but never connection. To chase, but never to arrive. And here's the kicker. Sexual energy isn't just biological. It's spiritual. It's creative. It's the life force itself. This is the same energy that animates your body, fuels your passions, births new life. In ancient traditions, this energy was respected, cultivated, and channeled toward higher consciousness. Sex wasn't sinful, it was sacred. It was a form of prayer, a ceremony, a merging of souls. But instead of being taught that, you were taught to fear it, and the more disconnected you became from your sexual energy, the easier you were to control. When you cut someone off from their own source of vitality, you create a person who is dependent, insecure, and easily manipulated. Someone who constantly seeks fulfillment outside themselves, in religion, in products, in entertainment, in substances. They chase something that can only be found within, because they've forgotten the truth, that their sexual energy is their power. And maybe you're starting to realize this. Maybe a part of you always knew something didn't add up. That the way sex is talked about and sold isn't the full picture. That something sacred has been taken away. Some of the things I'm about to share might go beyond what I'm allowed to say here on YouTube. That's why we created the Insights Academy, a free newsletter where we explore these deeper teachings in full. You'll also get a digital copy of the Kybalion, but only if you sign up using the link in the description. Here's the truth most people never hear. Your relationship with sex has been shaped by systems designed to keep you confused and disconnected. Generations have grown up believing that sex is either something to suppress or something to consume, but almost no one has been told that it's something to honor. And so the cycle continues. The spiritual potential of sex remains hidden in plain sight, dismissed, taboo, misunderstood, while people chase fleeting pleasure and wonder why they still feel empty. But you're here now. You're starting to peel back the layers, to ask the right questions, and that's where real transformation begins. Because the moment you start to see, really see, how much of your power has been stolen, that's the moment you can begin to take it back. So what happens when you begin to reclaim that power? Your sexual energy, not just as something physical, but as something sacred. You become sovereign, and that is terrifying to the systems that want to control you. Because the truth is, a person who understands their sexual energy isn't easy to manipulate. They no longer chase validation. They no longer seek approval from systems built to profit off their confusion. They become grounded, whole, and self-aware. That's why this disconnection, this confusion around sex, isn't just a cultural accident. It's a control mechanism. Long before society twisted the meaning of sex into something shameful or shallow, ancient cultures held a completely different understanding. They saw sex not as temptation, not as a commodity, but as sacred, as divine, as a living, breathing energy that connects us to something far greater than ourselves. In many ancient traditions, sexual union wasn't just an intimate act, it was a spiritual ritual, a sacred ceremony, a way to touch the divine through the body, to experience transcendence through connection. These teachings weren't based on fantasy or myth. They were grounded in thousands of years of observation, practice, and spiritual insight. Passed down through mystery schools, oral traditions, and hidden temples, these teachings helped people unlock something that's been almost completely forgotten in modern life. In ancient India, the practice of Tantra wasn't just about eroticism, it was about transcendence. It was a deep, sacred science of energy, consciousness, and divine union. The masculine and feminine energies weren't just about gender, they were universal principles. Shiva and Shakti, consciousness and energy, stillness and movement, existing in perfect balance. Through the sacred act of sexual union, practitioners weren't just seeking pleasure, they were merging with the divine, melting the illusion of separation, dissolving the ego, remembering that we are not separate beings, but extensions of a single universal consciousness. Every breath, every gaze, every touch was a prayer. It was never about performance, it was about presence. In ancient China, Taoist practitioners had a similar view. They saw sexual energy as a vital force, not just for pleasure, but for health, longevity, and spiritual awakening. Through practices like sexual alchemy, they learned to circulate sexual energy throughout the body. Not to lose energy through release, but to transmute it, to nourish the organs, balance the yin and yang within, and cultivate something they called Jing, the very essence of life. To the Taoists, sex wasn't indulgence, it was integration, a method of harmonizing body and spirit. And then there were the ancient Egyptians. In their temples and hieroglyphs, hidden within their rituals and myths, were codes, symbols of sacred sexuality. The union of Isis and Osiris wasn't just a mythological love story, it was an initiation, a metaphor for the merging of polarities, the death of the ego, and the rebirth of consciousness. Sexual rites were conducted not for pleasure, but for regeneration, for activating dormant spiritual potential, for experiencing union with divine forces that existed beyond the material world. Even early Gnostic traditions whispered similar truths. They saw sexuality not as sinful, but as a pathway to God, to unity, to returning to the source. In some of the earliest Christian sects, long before the institutional church rose to power, there were teachings that honored sacred union, not celibacy, as a path to enlightenment. But those teachings were dangerous, not because they were false, but because they were true. Because people who are spiritually awake, sexually empowered, and deeply connected to their inner life force, they don't submit easily. They don't follow blindly. They're not dependent on approval from outside systems, and so, one by one, these traditions were silenced. Temples were burned, priesthoods were dismantled, scripts were rewritten. What was once sacred became taboo. What was once empowering became forbidden. And now we're left with fragments, bits and pieces. Tantra reduced to exotic clichés, Taoist sexual practices dismissed as superstition. Gnostic scriptures labeled heretical. Egyptian wisdom turned into museum artifacts instead of living truth. But the knowledge didn't disappear entirely. It couldn't, because truth, real truth, can't be destroyed. It just goes underground, waiting to be rediscovered. And here's the thing. You don't have to be a monk or a mystic to access it. You don't have to live in a temple or wear robes or meditate on a mountain. You just have to wake up. Because the tragedy is that most people will go their entire lives never knowing what they've lost, never knowing that their sexuality was meant to be sacred, that it was a bridge to the divine, that it could have transformed their lives from the inside out. But once you begin to reconnect with this energy, even just a little, it changes everything. Suddenly, the illusions start to crumble. You stop seeing sex as a performance or as something to be hidden or consumed. You start to feel it as a source of life, as something that's always been yours. And with that shift comes power. Not the kind of power that controls others, but the kind of power that frees you. If sexual energy has that kind of potential, if it can heal, awaken, and reconnect you to something infinite, then ask yourself, why was it turned into a source of shame? Why was it stripped of its spiritual meaning? The answer is simple: control. When you cut people off from the most intimate source of their own power, you don't just weaken their confidence, you weaken their entire connection to self. And disconnected people, they're easy to manage, easy to sell to, easy to govern. Religion understood this first. Shame someone for their desires, and they'll always need someone else to tell them what's right. Make them believe their instincts are sinful, and they'll stop trusting their own body. That's when the gatekeepers step in, the church, the priest, the doctrine, offering you redemption, but only on their terms. That's not spirituality, that's manipulation, and religion was just the first step. As society evolved, new systems took over, and they were even more ruthless. As religion began to lose its grip in modern societies, new systems of influence emerged, slicker, louder, and far more profitable. The advertising industry stepped in, followed closely by mass media. And they discovered something that changed everything. Nothing captures human attention like sex, but not sacred sex. Not conscious, connected, soul-deep union. That kind of sexuality doesn't sell. What sells is distortion. The version of sex you're bombarded with every day is carefully crafted to manipulate you. It's performative, shallow, fragmented, designed to stir desire without ever offering satisfaction. Because if you're never fulfilled, you'll keep looking, and looking, and buying. Ads flash idealized bodies across screens. Billboards promise love if you just buy the right perfume, wear the right jeans, drive the right car. The message is clear. You're not desirable unless you buy this. You're not whole unless you have that. You're not worthy unless someone else approves of you. And just when you think you're getting close to the image they sold you, just when you buy the product, get the body, land the relationship, the goalpost moves again. Because the point isn't to help you arrive. It's to keep you chasing. Why? Because a person who is always craving is a person who is always consuming. This is the cycle. Stimulate desire, then offer temporary relief. Hook you with sex, then distract you with stuff. You stay on the treadmill, and the system stays in control. And while advertising is busy planting seeds of insecurity, the entertainment industry waters them. Movies, shows, music videos, nearly every story you see reinforces the same ideas. Sex is about performance, about conquest, about who can be the most attractive, the most seductive, the most dominant. What you almost never see is sex as sacred. You're not shown intimacy as a spiritual experience. You're not shown partnership as a mirror of divine balance. You're rarely, if ever, shown sexuality as a tool for healing or awakening. Instead, you're taught that love is dramatic, that relationships are unstable, that vulnerability is weakness. And the more you absorb these narratives, the more disconnected you become from others and from yourself. And then there's pornography. More than anything else in our modern world, porn has become the ultimate tool for reprogramming sexual consciousness. Let's be clear, this isn't a moral judgment. It's an energetic one. Porn hijacks your biology. It floods your brain with dopamine. It creates patterns, instant gratification, no emotional investment, no energetic exchange. It trains your body to associate arousal with fantasy, not with real connection. Over time, it desensitizes you, not just physically, but emotionally. Suddenly, real intimacy feels slow, messy, awkward. Real people can't compete with the fantasy. Real relationships require patience, vulnerability, presence, and for someone raised on porn, those things can feel uncomfortable, even threatening. The result? We have an entire generation, maybe more, struggling to connect deeply, struggling to feel, struggling to be present in their own bodies. And that was never an accident. Because the more disconnected you are from authentic intimacy, the more likely you are to seek comfort in distractions. To buy more, scroll more, click more, to escape rather than embody. And that's exactly what the system wants. A population addicted to shallow pleasure is easy to control. They're predictable, they're emotionally unstable, but they can't pinpoint why. They're always seeking, but never arriving. They fear being alone, but struggle to truly connect. And in that confusion, in that void, the system thrives. Because when you're disconnected from your sexual energy, you're disconnected from so much more than pleasure. You're cut off from your own power. Sexual energy isn't just about desire, it's about life. It's the current that fuels your creativity, your confidence, your vitality. It's what makes you feel fully alive, embodied, awake. When that current is flowing, you feel unstoppable, inspired, magnetic. You're in sync with your own being, but when it's blocked or distorted, you feel stuck. Numb, anxious, doubtful. Like you're always waiting for something to finally make you feel whole. The system is designed to keep it that way. Because a disconnected, anxious population is a compliant one. People who are in survival mode, who feel insecure, who are constantly looking for approval, don't start revolutions. They don't challenge authority. They don't question the narrative. They just keep scrolling, keep working, keep consuming. But when someone reconnects with their sexual energy in a sacred way, everything shifts. They start to feel their body again, not as an object to fix or flaunt, but as a temple, as a vessel for life, for spirit, for creation. They stop craving attention from the outside because they've found something far deeper inside. They begin to move differently, speak differently, choose differently. They become sovereign. And the system doesn't know what to do with someone who is sovereign. That's why the suppression of sacred sexuality is one of the most effective control mechanisms ever invented. It's invisible, it's silent, and it works best when no one even knows it's happening. Most people just internalize the shame. They assume their guilt is natural. They carry confusion and disconnection as if it's just part of being human. But it's not. It was engineered. And now that you see it, now that you understand it, the question becomes, what will you do with that awareness? Because the moment you reclaim your sexual energy, not just as desire, but as your spiritual life force, you begin to break free. Free from the lies, free from the programs, free from the need to be anything other than who you already are. That's when you stop playing by their rules, and you start creating your own. Let's go even deeper now. If the system has worked so hard to suppress and distort your sexual energy, then what are they so afraid of? What exactly is buried under the shame, guilt, and distraction? The answer is ancient, powerful, and real. It's called Kundalini, a dormant spiritual force described for thousands of years in spiritual traditions across the world. Not metaphor, not myth, a real energetic phenomenon that lives inside you. According to ancient teachings, Kundalini is your life force in its purest, most potent form. It's often symbolized as a coiled serpent resting at the base of your spine, waiting to awaken. And the fuel that awakens it, that charges it, activates it, moves it? Sexual energy. Yes. The same energy the world has told you to suppress, fear, or waste is the exact force needed to awaken the most powerful spiritual energy in your body. But here's the truth. Kundalini is not a casual thing. It's not a trend or a party trick. It's not something you can force or rush without consequences. When awakened properly, it doesn't just heighten your sensations, it transforms your entire consciousness. This energy doesn't rise randomly. It moves through chakras, the body's energy centers. As it moves upward, it cleanses, activates, and releases blockages that have been stuck there for years, even lifetimes. That fear you've been carrying? That shame you couldn't shake? The trauma that lingered in your nervous system? Kundalini burns through it all. It dissolves illusions. It exposes the false beliefs that were programmed into you about your worth, your body, your identity. And it reconnects you to something far more real, your divinity. But, and this is crucial, the transformation can only happen when the energy is honored, not exploited. The ancient mystics knew this. That's why teachings about Kundalini were passed down carefully, privately, in mystery schools and sacred lineages. This wasn't gatekeeping out of ego, it was protection. Because when awakened improperly, this energy can cause major psychological and emotional instability. It can amplify what hasn't been healed. It can rip open old wounds if the foundation isn't strong. That's why awakening your sexual energy is not just about liberation, it's about responsibility. Modern society doesn't teach us how to prepare for this. We aren't taught how to ground ourselves in our bodies, how to regulate our nervous systems, or how to hold space for intensity without reacting or dissociating. We're taught to chase stimulation, not to expand our capacity for true presence. But the ancient systems, Tantra, Taoism, Gnosticism, Egyptian mystery schools, they taught something very different. They taught preparation, discipline, breathwork, body awareness, energy mastery. They taught people how to slowly awaken this force, how to move it through the body, how to transmute sexual energy into creativity, healing, even divine bliss. This wasn't for indulgence, it was for evolution. And if you've ever wondered why this kind of knowledge isn't widely available, well, now you know. Because a person who activates their Kundalini is not a good consumer. They aren't easy to frighten. They don't fall for shame. They become less reactive, more intuitive, more sovereign. They live from the inside out, not the outside in. They listen to their own inner guidance system, and they stop depending on institutions to define who they are or how they should live. And in a world built on your obedience, that's revolutionary. So, the system did what it always does with dangerous truth. It buried it. And instead, it gave you the watered-down versions. The distractions. The consumer-friendly, highly sexualized, but spiritually hollow substitutes. It took the raw power of sacred union and turned it into pornography. It took spiritual practice and turned it into performance. It took healing rituals and turned them into romantic fantasies. But underneath all the noise, the truth is still there, waiting. And the more you reconnect with your sexual energy, not through fantasy, but through presence, the more the truth reveals itself to you. You begin to feel the difference between craving and connection, between chasing and receiving, between force and flow. You start to notice how your body actually feels when it's respected rather than used. How your energy rises when you say no to empty pleasure and yes to deeper truth. You begin to make decisions from a place of alignment, not addiction. And over time, your life begins to shift. Relationships deepen. You begin attracting people who meet you on a soul level, not just a surface one. Your creativity surges. You start to feel inspired, not just by ideas, but by existence itself. Your intuition sharpens. You begin sensing things others miss. Timing, alignment, authenticity. And perhaps most powerfully, you stop searching outside yourself for something to complete you. Because you realize you were never incomplete. You were just disconnected. Reclaiming your sexual energy means remembering who you are. It means letting go of the shame that was never yours to carry. It means standing tall in a world that profits off your self-doubt and saying, "Not anymore." This is the beginning of true awakening, not an escape from desire, but a transformation of it. Not celibacy, not indulgence. Integration. The path of sacred sexuality doesn't ask you to be perfect. It asks you to be present, to feel, to explore, to honor your energy and use it intentionally. Because once you do, once you start working with that energy instead of suppressing or wasting it, your whole life becomes infused with power. Not power over others, but power from within. The kind of power that creates, that heals, that loves without. Let's pause and get real. Because this awakening we're talking about, it's not just energetic, it's practical. When you start to reconnect with your sexual energy in a sacred way, It begins changing things in your everyday life. And not just in your bedroom. You start to walk differently, speak differently, make different choices. You become more present, more creative, more alive. You feel grounded, like you're actually in your body instead of floating through your life on autopilot. That numbness, the emotional fog you maybe didn't even realize you were in, begins to lift. You start to feel again, not just pleasure, but presence, depth, meaning. And from that presence comes clarity. Suddenly, the distractions that used to captivate you, social media, porn, shallow relationships, endless shopping, mindless entertainment, start to feel empty. Not wrong, just unfulfilling. Like junk food after a week of nourishing meals, you don't crave them the same way anymore. Because your system has remembered what real nourishment feels like. This is one of the biggest signs that you're coming back to your power. Your attention shifts. You start to see through the noise. You stop being seduced by things that once hooked you, and what used to control you. It begins to lose its grip. You don't need as much external validation anymore. You stop wondering what others think. You stop asking for permission to feel, to want, to express. Instead, you know. You know what resonates. You know what drains you. You know who's good for your energy and who isn't. That's sovereignty. And here's something else. As your sexual energy rises, it brings your creative energy with it. This is not a coincidence. Because sexual energy and creative energy are the same force, just expressed differently. When you reclaim one, you unlock the other. You might find yourself inspired to write again. Paint, build, dance, start that business you've been dreaming about for years, or simply speak your truth with confidence and clarity, in ways you never dared before. Why? Because that stagnant energy that's been trapped in your body, in your hips, your chest, your voice, is finally moving, finally flowing, finally free. You stop waiting for someone to give you permission to be great. You just start. That's what happens when you stop leaking energy through constant distraction, mindless consumption, and unintentional sexuality. You start pouring it into things that matter, into your purpose, into your healing, into your relationships. Speaking of relationships, those shift too. As you reclaim your energy, your standards change. You stop being attracted to people who feed on your insecurities. You stop tolerating shallow connections that feel good in the moment, but leave you empty after. You start craving depth. You want real presence. Emotional intimacy. Shared growth. Sacred union. You begin to recognize love, not just by how someone makes you feel when they're around, but by how you feel about yourself in their presence. You become more honest, less performative. You stop hiding parts of yourself to keep the peace or avoid rejection, because you've stopped rejecting yourself. And let's talk about sex for a moment. Real, embodied, sacred sex. Not the performative version we've been shown. Not the conquest. Not the fantasy. But the kind of sex where time disappears. Where you're not just touching another person's body, you're touching their soul, their energy, their essence. The kind of union where you both drop the masks and meet each other, raw and real and unguarded. Where every touch, every breath, every look is an act of reverence. Where it's not about finishing, it's about expanding. That's sacred sexuality. That's what happens when you bring your full presence into intimacy, when your energy, your heart, your breath, your body are all aligned in one moment of truth. And here's the thing. This isn't about technique. It's not about mastering some secret sequence of moves. It's about intention, about slowing down, feeling, listening, responding from the heart, not from the programming. Because when you show up with that kind of presence, your partner feels it. And they rise to meet you. Or they don't. And if they don't, you begin to see why that relationship might not be aligned anymore. And that's okay. Because you're no longer clinging to what drains you. You're choosing what honors you. And let's be clear, this path doesn't mean you'll never feel desire again. Quite the opposite. You'll feel more. You'll feel desire in its purest form, not as an impulse to escape, but as a call to create, to connect, to become. Because desire, real desire, isn't something to be feared or suppressed. It's not the enemy. It's sacred. It's the fire that drives evolution, that births life, that fuels growth. The system twisted it into something dangerous because they feared its power. They feared what you'd become if you stopped apologizing for your desires, if you stopped trying to fix yourself, if you stopped letting guilt and shame decide who you could be. Because when you reclaim desire as sacred, you stop being manageable, you stop fitting neatly into categories, you stop being addicted to approval, you stop living someone else's life, and you start living yours, from the inside out, from soul, from truth, from power. And once that switch flips, once that energy flows, you become the kind of person this system was never designed to contain. So, here's the question that changes everything. What happens when millions of people awaken to this truth at the same time? Not just a few seekers scattered across the globe, but entire communities, generations, cultures, finally seeing through the illusion. The illusion that told them their desires were sinful, that their bodies were shameful, that their pleasure was dangerous, that their power could only be accessed through someone else's permission. What happens when all of that starts to unravel? The system begins to fall, because the system relies on your disconnection, from yourself, from others, from the divine. When you're disconnected, you look outward for everything. You chase validation from media. You seek belonging in consumer culture. You trade your time, your energy, your sovereignty for a sense of safety that was always conditional. Always one paycheck, one relationship, one approval away from being pulled out from under you. But once you realize that your connection to your body, to your energy, to your soul was always yours, the entire structure they built begins to crack. And that's not just personal transformation. That's revolution. Because a population that's awake is not easily divided. They can't be manipulated by fear-based politics. They're not baited into outrage every time the headlines flash. They're not sold fantasies of status or success when they've already found meaning within. They become immune to the constant low-level panic that fuels modern society. And that kind of population, that kind of collective, is unstoppable. That's why sacred sexuality has always been treated as a threat. Because true intimacy isn't just about connection between two people, it's about collective healing. When we're intimate with ourselves, with each other, with life, we stop needing systems to define us. We create our own culture, our own values, our own stories. One based not in fear, but in reverence, not in scarcity, but in creation. And this scares the system more than anything else, because their survival depends on keeping you fragmented. If they can keep you ashamed of your body, you'll keep buying their beauty products. If they can keep you afraid of your desires, you'll keep turning to authority figures to tell you what's right. If they can keep you addicted to cheap pleasure, you'll never discover the deep fulfillment that would render their distractions meaningless. But what if you didn't need any of it? What if you didn't need anyone to tell you you're enough? What if you already are? What if you stopped trying to become and started to remember? That's the shift. That's the return. And it's not theoretical. It's practical. It's embodied. It shows up in how you treat yourself, how you show up in relationships, how you create, how you lead, how you love. It's not loud or performative. It's quiet. rooted, unshakable. And that's why it spreads. Because when you live in alignment with this sacred energy, people feel it, even if they don't know what it is. They feel your presence, your clarity, your calm. They notice how you don't react the way others do, how you hold your boundaries, how you speak from truth instead of fear. And they get curious. They lean in. They ask questions. They begin their own unraveling. That's how awakening moves, one person at a time, one breath, one touch, one conversation, until a critical mass forms, and at that point, the system can't hold, because the system isn't made of laws and buildings, it's made of belief, and belief is fluid, it shifts, quickly, especially when it's built on lies. And here's what the system never expected, that we would remember together. That we would start talking about things that were once taboo, that we would share stories, tools, and practices, that we would normalize sacred sexuality, not as rebellion, but as return, that we would learn how to alchemize our desire, not suppress it, not indulge it mindlessly, but turn it into something sacred, that we would remember that our bodies are not shameful, they are temples, that our energy is not dangerous, it is divine, that pleasure is not sinful, it is intelligent, that our connection to each other, through intimacy, through union, through shared vulnerability, is the very force that could heal everything this world has broken. And it starts with you. Because every time you choose to come back into your body, every time you choose to breathe instead of numb, to feel instead of flee, to stay present with your desire instead of collapsing into shame, you're healing generations of suppression. You're rewiring your nervous system for freedom. You're giving others permission to do the same. And no, it's not always easy. Because as this energy awakens, it shows you everything that stands in its way. The old pain, the buried shame, the programmed beliefs. But that's the point. Because the only way out is through. And when you move through, with awareness, with compassion, with reverence, what you find on the other side is beyond words. It's not just sex, it's not even just spirituality, it's a reunion. With yourself, with the divine, with life. And that's the kind of power no system. Let's ground this even more. Because awakening sacred sexuality isn't just about big ideas and energetic shifts. It's also about facing what's been hiding in the dark corners of your mind and body for years. It's about healing. That means bringing awareness to the guilt, shame, judgment, and pain you've been carrying, maybe silently, for most of your life. The system didn't just disconnect you from your power. It conditioned you to be afraid of your own healing. It taught you that feeling your desire was dangerous, that pleasure was sinful, that your curiosity made you bad. And so, piece by piece, you learned to shut down, to go numb, to stay safe by staying small. But here's the truth. Healing doesn't happen by avoiding what hurts. It happens by turning toward it, by gently, lovingly, curiously asking, whose voice is that? Who taught me to feel ashamed of my body? Who told me my pleasure was a problem? Who told me desire was something to fight against, rather than honor? When you start asking those questions, the unraveling begins. You start to see that much of what you believed about yourself wasn't even yours to begin with. It was inherited, passed down from generations of people who were also disconnected, afraid, and trying to survive. That's not blame. It's context. Because when you understand where your wounds come from, you stop personalizing them. You stop thinking, there's something wrong with me, and you start seeing the truth. There's something wrong with what I was taught. And that shift is everything. Because once the shame is no longer yours, it loses its grip. And in its place, something else rises, your natural curiosity, your joy, your playfulness, your capacity for pleasure. But don't expect this to happen overnight. This is not a linear journey. It's a spiral. Some days you'll feel powerful, connected, fully alive. Other days you'll feel like you're back at square one. That's normal. That's healing. What matters is that you keep coming back. Back to your body. Back to your breath. Back to your truth. Because every time you do, you build new pathways. You create safety where there used to be fear. You rewire your nervous system to trust your own energy again. And the more safety you feel inside, the more pleasure you can hold. Because pleasure, real, deep, sacred pleasure, requires safety. It's not about pushing or performing. It's about receiving. It's about surrendering to the moment without fear of judgment, rejection, or danger. And that's why healing your relationship with sexuality often involves healing your relationship with trauma. Not just big, obvious trauma, but the subtle, quiet kind. The kind that looks like flinching when touched, even by someone you love, holding your breath during intimacy without realizing it, feeling guilty after experiencing pleasure, struggling to ask for what you want, feeling disconnected from your body, especially during sex. These are not signs of brokenness. They're signs that your body is protecting you the only way it knows how. And as you create space to listen, not to fix, but to witness, your body starts to trust you again. This is sacred work. It's spiritual work. Because when you heal your body's relationship with intimacy, you open the door to true union, with yourself and with others. That's when relationships begin to transform. They become containers for growth, not just comfort. You stop reenacting old patterns. You stop attracting people who reinforce your wounds, and you start building relationships based on honesty, respect, and deep energetic alignment. You stop needing to be chosen because you've already chosen yourself. And when you show up from that place, everything changes. Because now, sex is no longer a transaction. It's a transmission. It becomes a conversation between souls, not just bodies. It becomes a meditation, a prayer, a way of returning to wholeness, not just for you, but for your partner too. And this sacred connection begins to ripple out into every area of your life. You start noticing beauty more often. You start speaking more clearly. You begin to trust your instincts again. You say yes only when you mean it, and no without guilt. You don't need to convince anyone of your worth. You don't need to chase. You radiate. Because you've stopped outsourcing your power. You've stopped performing for approval. You've remembered that your energy is sacred and that it's yours to protect, direct, and share, intentionally. And this is where the system loses its grip for good. Because it cannot sell to someone who is whole. It cannot control someone who is grounded. It cannot manipulate someone who trusts their own body more than external authority. You've become unprogrammable, and you're not alone. Every person who chooses this path, who reclaims their body, their pleasure, their power, adds to a growing wave of awakening. This is the revolution no one saw coming. Not because it's loud or violent, but because it's sovereign. It doesn't depend on protests or politics. It spreads through presence, through healing, through sacred connection. It happens in bedrooms, in breathwork circles, in whispered conversations, in quiet moments of remembering. And it's already happening. Right here, in you. Now imagine this, a world where people are no longer ashamed of their bodies, where pleasure is not taboo, where desire isn't a problem to solve, but a compass pointing you toward growth, creation, and connection. What would that world even look like? No, really, pause and picture it. A world where we raise children to honor their energy instead of fearing it. Where teenagers are taught how to feel their emotions, how to communicate with honesty, how to respect boundaries, and how to explore desire with reverence rather than rebellion. A world where adults don't carry lifetimes of shame and silence, where relationships are founded not on power games or codependence, but on sacred mutuality, where the spiritual is not separated from the sexual, but fully integrated. That's not a fantasy. That's a potential reality. It's a future that's already forming, one conversation at a time, one healed wound at a time, one courageous decision to reclaim what was never meant to be stolen. But it takes us choosing it, because here's the truth. The old system isn't just going to disappear. It's designed to adapt, to evolve, to repackage the same manipulations in trendier clothes. We see it now in the spiritual marketplace, where sacred practices are commodified and turned into Instagram aesthetics, where Tantra is reduced to weekend workshops promising better orgasms without doing any inner work, where sacred sexuality becomes just another hashtag, stripped of depth. This is the system's last trick, turn awakening into a product. And if we're not careful, we'll miss the opportunity to go deeper. Because this journey, real sacred reclamation, is not glamorous. It's not always easy. It won't make you instantly popular or rich, but it will make you free. And freedom is messy. It's raw. It asks you to break up with the version of yourself that was built for survival and to start building the version of you that was made for thriving. The version that feels safe in your own skin. The version that trusts your instincts. The version that doesn't need to dominate or shrink, but knows how to expand with love. That's the version of you the system fears. Because you don't need their rules anymore. You don't need their rewards. You don't need their labels or limitations. You've remembered your own essence, and you can't be boxed in. And when enough people start living from that place, we stop waiting for a better world. We start building it. We stop waiting for permission to change. We become the change. And here's where it gets powerful. Sacred sexuality is not just about personal liberation. It's about collective elevation. When you reclaim your sexual energy, you don't just feel better. You become a force for healing in every room you walk into. You become someone who listens differently, loves differently, leads differently. You're no longer looking for power. You are power, embodied, and others feel that. They may not be able to name it, but they feel it. They feel safe with you. They feel inspired around you. They begin to wonder, what if I could live like that too? And that's how the ripple spreads. Because embodiment is contagious. People don't awaken because you tell them to. They awaken because your energy gives them permission to remember who they are. You become the walking proof that something different is possible. You don't preach it. You radiate it. And people notice. They start asking deeper questions. They stop settling for shallow love. They stop numbing out. They start healing. They start feeling. They start remembering. This is the real awakening. It doesn't begin in textbooks or temples. It begins in your nervous system, in your breath, in the way you relate to yourself when no one else is watching. And from there, it moves outward. From self to relationship, from relationship to community, from community to culture. It's not about overthrowing the system with force. It's about rendering it irrelevant, because you've built something better from within. And you're not alone. There are thousands, millions, maybe even more, just like you, feeling the same quiet call, wanting something deeper, searching for something real, yearning for the truth beneath the noise. And every time one of us answers that call, it gets easier for the next person. Every time one of us says, no more shame, no more disconnection, I choose wholeness, we light the way for others. And soon, what once felt rare and radical becomes normal. It becomes the new baseline, and that's how a world changes. Not all at once, but heartbeat by heartbeat, body by body, breath by breath, until the old ways collapse under the weight of our collective remembering. That is the power of sacred sexuality, not as rebellion, but as return, not as fantasy, but as embodiment, not as escape, but as embodiment, not as escape, but as homecoming. And the best part? It's already happening. Right here. Right now. In you. If you've made it this far, something inside you has already shifted. You may not even fully realize it yet, but the moment you began questioning the story you were told about sex, about desire, about your body, the spell began to break. And what comes next is not about perfection. It's not about becoming some idealized version of spiritual purity or sexual mastery. It's about integration. Real awakening is messy. Some days you'll feel aligned, magnetic, open, and empowered. Other days you'll feel like you've been thrown back into old patterns, stuck in old shame, lost in the fog again. That's okay. That's part of the process. This path isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. It's a deepening. And every layer you shed brings you closer to your essence. And here's the beautiful truth. Sacred sexuality is not about never feeling triggered again. It's about learning how to respond from awareness when you do. It's about meeting yourself with compassion, not criticism. It's about holding your own inner child when they panic, calming the nervous system that learned to associate desire with danger. It's about reminding yourself, again and again, I am safe in my body. My pleasure is sacred. My energy belongs to me. Because the world didn't teach you this. In fact, it taught you the opposite. But now you're the one doing the reteaching. To yourself, to your nervous system, to your lineage, and eventually to your future relationships, your community, and your children, whether biological or spiritual. This is generational healing work. You're not just breaking cycles in your own life, you're breaking chains that have bound entire bloodlines in silence, shame, and suppression. That's why it feels so intense. Because it is. You're carrying more than just your own pain. You're carrying ancestral grief, collective trauma, centuries of spiritual disconnection. But you're not doing it alone. There's a global awakening happening right now. Quietly, intimately, invisibly. All around the world, people are remembering. They're turning off the noise. They're stepping away from the scripts. They're creating new ways of loving, healing, relating, and being. And as you continue this work, breathing deeper, feeling more, choosing wholeness over performance, you become part of that wave, a current of remembrance. And from this place, you begin to live differently. You wake up in the morning and check in with your body before checking your phone. You move through your day not chasing validation, but listening for alignment. You engage with people not out of need, but out of genuine connection. You create not from fear of lack, but from a wellspring of overflowing energy. You begin to trust your cycles. You honor your seasons of rest, of expression, of expansion, of contraction. You stop rushing to produce. You stop apologizing for your rhythm. You stop measuring your worth by your output. And in that space, your intuition awakens. You begin receiving guidance that doesn't come from books or influences, but from within. You begin to hear the voice of your inner wisdom again, the one that was drowned out by noise for so long. It starts speaking more clearly. It tells you where to go, who to trust, what to let go of, and most importantly, who you really are. You start to see that your sacred energy isn't just about sex. It's about alignment. It's about moving through life with integrity, with presence, with purpose. You no longer betray yourself to be accepted. You no longer perform to be loved. You no longer barter pieces of your soul for temporary attention or false security. You embody wholeness. And from that wholeness, you attract different experiences. Not because you're manifesting better things, but because your frequency has changed. You're no longer a match for relationships rooted in neediness or control. You no longer tolerate environments that disrespect your energy. You no longer choose people, jobs, or habits that keep you disconnected. Instead, you begin aligning with what nourishes you. You start building a life that reflects your inner truth. And this becomes the new template, not just for you, but for everyone around you. You show others what's possible, not through preaching, but through embodiment, through presence, through how you love, how you breathe, how you live. And that's where the magic really begins. Because your awakening becomes contagious, it spreads not through force, but through frequency. Not through conversion, but through resonance. You become a walking transmission of what it looks like to reclaim sacred power. And suddenly, the world around you begins to shift, not because the system changed, but because you did. And through you, the new world is being born, one choice at a time, one breath at a time, one sacred yes to yourself at a time. Here we are, the final chapter in this journey. But really, it's just the beginning. Because everything you've felt, remembered, reclaimed throughout this process, it's not a destination. It's an invitation to live differently, to love differently, to be different, not because you've become someone new, but because you've finally returned to who you always were, before the programming, before the shame, before the world told you to forget. Now you remember. You remember that your body is not a burden. It's a temple. You remember that your desire is not a mistake. It's a map. You remember that your pleasure is not selfish. It's sacred. And most of all, you remember that your sexual energy isn't something to hide, fear, or commodify. It is life itself. The energy that creates galaxies. The spark that animates your soul. The current that flows through every living thing. That's what's been living inside you this whole time. And now that you see it, feel it, and know it, you're different. Not better. Not higher. Just aware. And awareness is the one thing the system could never fully suppress. Because once someone awakens to their own power, their own wholeness, their own sacred energy, no one can take it from them. And that's what you carry now. Not perfection, not certainty, but sovereignty. That word, sovereignty, means that no external system, label, ideology, or institution defines you. You are your own center, your own compass, your own source. That's the real secret they never wanted you to know. Not just about sex, about everything. The more people realize this, the more the old systems begin to shake. Because they depend on your compliance. They depend on your fear. 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 They lose their grip. You become unpredictable. You become ungovernable, not in rebellion, but in truth, because you no longer fall for empty promises. You don't need to be sold your power in pieces anymore. You know it's always been whole. And now, you carry that wisdom into the world. In your choices, in your relationships, in your voice, in your art, in your leadership. You embody the truth that sacred sexuality isn't just about sex. It's about how you show up in every area of your life. Authentic, rooted, and awake. And that's the revolution. Not in riots or rules, but in the subtle, unstoppable shift of millions of people returning to themselves. You're not just healing your own life, you're helping dissolve the architecture of disconnection that's defined this culture for far too long. And yes, you'll still be challenged. Yes, the old programming will try to pull you back sometimes. But now you know how to listen, how to breathe, how to choose presence over patterns, how to remember. That's all it takes. moment by moment, choosing what aligns with your truth, not their story. And if you ever forget, come back here. Come back to your body, to your breath, to this energy that flows through your spine, your heart, your soul. It's not gone. It never was. It was just waiting for you to be ready. And now that you are, there's no turning back. You've crossed the threshold. And on the other side is a life no system could ever script for you. One built from wholeness, from sacred union, from embodied freedom. And if this message resonates, if something in you is wide awake right now, breathing a little deeper, feeling a little more alive, then trust that. Because you're not alone. This community, this rising tide of sacred rebellion, is growing every day. And if you want to go even deeper, into the teachings, the practices, the wisdom that can't always be shared here publicly, that's why Insights Academy exists. It's a free private space where we share what's been hidden. You'll also receive a free copy of the Kybalion, a cornerstone of esoteric wisdom, when you join using the link in the description. But whether you join or not, carry this with you. Your sexual energy is sacred. Your body is divine. Your desire is holy. And your awakening is already underway. Thank you for walking this path. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for rising. The system's greatest fear was never your rebellion. It was your sovereignty. And now that you have it, live like it.